Welcome to our study on the book of Romans. This is the Romans Education Part 7, and this is session 49. Welcome back after a week's vacation. I see Milt and Barbara made it back in one piece from their journeys. I don't know what it is about those Pennsylvania people. If somebody comes down here, somebody from Pennsylvania has to go up there. I don't know. I know you weren't in Pennsylvania. I got you. They're filtering down here. That's right. So, okay. So I'm glad that we're back, and I'm glad to get back to this. It's always good to go visit family. It's always good to get back home. So we like it all. In the last session, I said that what we do is, as the last thing we need to do before showing us how to cast off the works of darkness, is to identify the targets of the three categories of the works of darkness. So let's get to it. It is because Satan has identified, and I'm going to use these pillars that are holding something up here, because Satan has identified there are three things that he must destroy in order to bring the world to the place that he needs it. It is because he identified three targets that he has developed three categories under his works of darkness. And I probably should have said it to you that way back in the beginning when we were first learning about the works of darkness. So the reason there are three of these is because he is going after three particular things. And today we're going to be identifying what those things are, because each one of those categories, and it's not like all three together, just kind of go after all three together. But the pride of life issue is going after one of these. And so it's important to know what it's going after, and then I'll show you how we know that as we go through the Scripture about this. Every single one of these categories are designed with two things in mind. The first thing is to tear down the particular thing that God has put in place, and the second thing is to replace it with Satan's substitute. So destroy and replace, destroy and replace. These categories of the works of darkness have that particular thing in mind, and so they're designed to do just that. And so if Satan can get men to participate in these works of darkness, look, these two things will be the natural and unavoidable result. In other words, you can't participate in these without these things coming under attack in your own mind, and you beginning to enter, and I say you, I mean, I'm talking about the world of men, but men are not, they can't participate in these works of darkness and have them continue to go to the depth and the breadth that they do without them suddenly calling into question these three things. It changes the way they think about them, and then suddenly, when these get destroyed, they're going to be naturally replaced with the thing that Satan is trying to substitute it for. The point I'm trying to make is that is an unavoidable consequence. You cannot do those without that beginning to take place. Now, can a person stop? Of course. Can they reverse back? Of course. But look, the only way to dispel darkness is with a light. The only way to get rid of the untruth is with the truth. Okay, so having said that, let me just say that these works then, as they grew not only in the world, but as Satan is working them in this dispensation of grace, they are trying to increase in two particular ways. They're increasing in the depth of where all of these things are taking men. And then they're increasing in their reach as far as how many people are being sucked into that. See, at one point, there was just a few people that were embracing the darkness. He not only wants that darkness to increase, but He wants more people to embrace the darkness. Okay, so with that in mind, what I'm going to do is I'm going to talk to you, and we're going to turn over to the book of Isaiah, but I want to talk to you about the condition that Israel found itself in, where these works of darkness produced a repudiation of God and an acceptance with the adversary. And they weren't, and that was going to result, folks, so that when it gets out here, there'll not just be a rejection of God, there's that part, but there'll be a receiving of the adversary. There'll not just be a rejection of the Lord's Christ, but there'll be a receiving of the Antichrist. So this is going to work on many different levels. And so as we get ready to read this in Isaiah, understand this. Israel made an agreement. Now let me say it this way. They are in agreement with Satan. Those works of darkness have caused them to tear down what God put in place and replace it with Satan's substitute. So they're in agreement with Satan, and it will come to the place where not only were they in agreement, but they will make an agreement with him. And this is what the prophet is talking about. So in Isaiah 28, we're going to see that this is going to be the condition. Now look, in Isaiah 28, let me just mark it right here. This, and let's just call that John the Baptist. This is describing the condition of things when John the Baptist showed up. What happened just before that? What was Israel going through? Just before John the Baptist comes on the scene. 400 years of silence. They didn't hear a peep from God. And so this is what Israel had done at that point. They had made an agreement and they were in agreement. So Isaiah chapter 28, verse 14. Wherefore hear the word of the Lord, ye scornful men, that rule this people which is in Jerusalem. Because ye have said, we have made a covenant with death, and with hell are we at agreement. When the overflowing scourge shall pass through, it shall not come unto us. For we have made lies our refuge, and under falsehood have we hid ourselves. Now that's interesting, isn't it? That the deception is so great that by the time John the Baptist shows up, the nation has made this covenant with death, and with hell they're in agreement, and they're saying, hey, when the judgment, here it's called the overflowing scourge, when this predicted judgment comes, here's what they believe. It's not going to come to us. We're not going to get caught by that. It says, we have made lies our refuge, and under falsehood we have hid ourselves. Later, we're going to read the prophet where he's going to say, you know what, these men, they don't stop there. They say this, what we're doing, God isn't even taking notice of. We're getting clean away with this. Why would you think that? Because after 400 years of not hearing from God, see, there was no prophet showing up saying, hey, thus saith the Lord, you better get yourself straightened up. There wasn't any of that. So they're thinking, you know what? We're going to be okay with this. Nothing's going to happen. And so they are in agreement. Now what I need to do is take you to Daniel. And Daniel, you know, is a fifth course prophet. He's in the first installment. He's been carried away captive into Babylon. So that's where he is. And he is praying. Now I want to take you to this, Daniel chapter 9, verse 20. And whiles I was speaking and praying and confessing my sin and the sin of my people Israel, and presenting my supplication before the Lord my God for the holy mountain of my God, yea, whilst I was speaking in prayer, even the man Gabriel, who I had seen in the vision at the beginning, being caused to fly swiftly, touched me about the time of the evening oblation. Now I want to go back and talk about that for a moment. There's actually something we're going to be looking at here in Daniel. But I thought this is a good opportunity to reemphasize something right here. And this is about prayer in Israel's program. When Daniel says, I was praying and confessing my sin and the sin of my people Israel, why would Daniel be doing that? Well, they're suffering under the consequences of the captivity, right? You know what? Remember, they were under a performance contract. For God to begin to bless you again, you're going to have to repent and return, right? And so he's doing this, he's praying, and look what he says in verse 21. Whilst I was speaking in prayer, he talks about Gabriel, touched me about the time of the evening oblation. What is the evening oblation? That's the evening sacrifice. And what I want to show you real quickly, and I just want to kind of run through this, is that in Israel's program, prayer, I know we've talked about those differences, was very much different from the way we think of prayer today. Let me ask you, when do you pray? Anytime, right? Pray before you go to bed, and pray at meals. Do you ever pray going down the road? Huh? Sometimes praying, driving down the road. You ever pray while you're at work? Sure. I mean, you can do that. That's the way that is. Now, let me show you something about Israel's prayer that's a little bit different. Because Israel had 3 times that they were going to pray. I wind up erasing this. They had prayer scheduled 3 times a day. In the morning, at noon, and in the evening. And that's prayer time for Israel. And there's something else specific about that. Let me just show this to you. Psalm 55. Evening and morning and at noon will I pray and cry aloud, and he shall hear my voice. Now someone might read that and say, he's just talking about all the time. The evening and the morning, at noon, I just do it all the time. But that's what the Scriptures will say. The Scriptures are going to show us that it's more than that. And by the way, he said, I was praying, remember what Daniel said? At the time of the evening oblation. There was a sacrifice that was made in the morning. There's a sacrifice that was made in the evening. And so there's something going on there. And that was a scheduled time of prayer for them. Now Isaiah also talks about the place where prayer was to take place. And the place where prayer was to take place, and each one of these times was in the temple, or before that was built, in the tabernacle. The people would gather at the courtyard, and in the morning they would all pray, at noon they would all pray, and in the evening they would all pray. Take a look at this in Isaiah 56:7. Even them will I bring to my holy mountain and make them joyful in my house of prayer. Their burnt offerings and their sacrifices shall be accepted upon mine altar, for mine house shall be called an house of prayer for all people. That's something Jesus picked up on the terminology. Remember when he whipped the money changers out of the temple? And he said, this is supposed to be a house of prayer. You've turned it into merchandise. Remember when he was doing that? He's not just making that up. This is coming out of the Old Testament prophets. When Solomon dedicated the temple to the Lord, he talks about that being a house of prayer, and they were going to gather at that house morning, noon, and night to pray. And so, look what this says. Psalm 116:13. I will take the cup of salvation and call upon the name of the Lord. I will pay my vows unto the Lord now in the presence of all His people. Well, wait a minute. If you're calling on the Lord in the presence of all His people, then everybody's got to be gathered together, don't they? And then in verse 15, precious in the sight of the Lord is the death of His saints, O Lord, truly, I am thy servant and the son of thine handmaid. Thou hast loosed my bonds. I will offer to thee the sacrifice of thanksgiving and will call upon the name of the Lord. I will pay my vows unto the Lord now in the presence of all His people, in the courts of the Lord's house, In the midst of thee, O Jerusalem, praise ye the Lord. Why in the midst of Jerusalem? Because that's where the temple was found. In the midst of Jerusalem. So you know what? They're all going to gather at the courts of the house of prayer, which is the temple, and they're going to gather 3 times a day. And there were sacrifices and things being offered at that time. I'll take you back. Remember when Hannah was praying for a son? And Eli, the priest, saw her, and it said that she was praying, her lips were moving, but no sound was coming out. And you know what he thought? He thought she was drunk. And when he confronts her, she says, oh no, I'm not drunk. She said, I just want a son, and I'm begging God for a son. Why is he the one to see her? Because when she went to make that prayer, where was she? She was at the temple. Eli was the priest. That's where she was. She went there to make that prayer. Look with me in Luke chapter 5 and Luke chapter 1 verse 5. There was in the days of Herod the king of Judea a certain priest named Zacharias of the course of Abiah, and his wife was of the daughters of Aaron, and her name was Elizabeth, and they were both righteous before God, walking in all the commandments and ordinances of the Lord blameless. And they had no child because that Elizabeth was barren, and they both were now well stricken in years. And it came to pass that while he executed the priest office before God in the order of his course, according to the custom of the priest office, his lot was to burn incense when he went into the temple of the Lord. And what you're going to find out is that incense got burnt at the evening sacrifice, at the time of evening prayer. And so that was part of his responsibility. Now look with me in Exodus chapter 30. And thou shalt make an altar to burn incense upon of shittim wood. Thou shalt make it, and thou shalt put it before the veil that is by the ark of the testimony, before the mercy seat that is over the testimony, where I'll meet with thee. And when Aaron lighteth the lamps at even, he shall put incense upon it, a perpetual incense before the Lord throughout your generations. Do you see that? So that incense is part of what's being offered up when you get to the evening sacrifice. And that was a time when he was offering that incense. What would the people be doing? They'd be gathered in the courtyard praying. Are you with me so far? So, quick review. Prayer happens in Israel's program 3 times a day. Morning, noon, and at evening. And it happens in a particular place. Thanks, Linda. It happens in a particular place. Where? At the temple. And the people gather in the courtyard in the presence of all the people for prayer. Everybody with me? Okay. So now, let's look back at Luke, because see, this is where that comes from. In Exodus, it told you this is when you do this incense sacrifice. So when we get back to our Luke passage, remember, as his custom was, he went in and did the evening incense. So it says, and the whole multitude of the people were praying without. Where is he offering the incense? Look, here's the hall of the courtyard of the temple. And here's the temple. And inside the temple is the holy place and the holy of holies. And he's in the holy place, offering the incense. So where are the people? They're gathered in the courtyard. They're without at the time of incense. The whole multitude of the people were out there praying while Zacharias was inside offering the incense. Everybody with me? Okay. And so, just to drive this point home, that the offering of the incense is so connected to the evening prayer that when he writes this, a Jew knows exactly what's being said. I'm sorry. And it doesn't matter. Psalm 141:1. Lord, I cry unto thee, make haste unto me, give ear unto my voice when I cry unto thee. That's prayer. Let my prayer be set forth before thee as incense. And when did the incense get offered? In the evening. And the lifting up of my hands as the evening sacrifice. Do you see how connected that is? He's saying that evening sacrifice, when you think of that, you're not just thinking about one guy walking in here and offering incense on the altar. You know what you're thinking about? The whole multitude is out there praying. So that's the thing that was going on with that. And so the Jews had that custom. Let me take you over to the book of Acts to show it to you. Now Peter and John went up together into the temple at the hour of prayer, being the 9th hour. So they went in at a specific time to a specific place to pray. Yes? Okay. And so when you get that, now let me take you over. And by the way, back during that time, during that time after the cross, even the Gentile converts to Israel's God know about this. This is how common it is. Let me take you to Cornelius in Acts chapter 10. And there was a certain man in Caesarea called Cornelius, a centurion of the band called the Italian band, a devout man and one that feared God, that's the true God, with all his house, which gave much alms to the people because he realizes he's going to, you know what? It's the Jew and he's going to have to be a friend to them. He realizes that. He gave much alms to the people and prayed to God always. He saw in a vision, evidently about the 9th hour of the day. That shouldn't be a surprise to you when you see that.
What time is that?
That's the hour, that's 3 o'clock in the afternoon.
Okay, that's what I was...
Yeah, 3 o'clock in the afternoon. Because, thanks for doing that, Bertha. The night had 4 watches to it. From 6 to 9 in the evening, that was called evening. From 9 to 12 was called midnight. From 12 to 3 was called cockcrow. And from 3 to 6 was called morning. And then from 6 to 7 was the first hour of the day. 7 to 8 was the second hour of the day. And you had, that's why Jesus says in the Gospels, are there not 12 hours in a day? Someone that doesn't know the Bible would look at that and go, well, Jesus didn't know what he was talking about. There's 24 hours in a day. He wasn't referring to how many hours make up a day. He was talking about the part of the day that is designated by the hour. So when you see the 9th hour, 3 o'clock in the afternoon. Okay. So here he says, verse 4, and when he looked on him, he was afraid and said, what is it, Lord? And he said to him, thy prayers and thine alms are come up for a memorial before God. Wait a minute. What hour is Cornelius praying? We just read it up here. The 9th hour of the day, he's in prayer and God gives him a vision. An angel comes to him and says, hey, now he's fixing to send Peter his way. Even Cornelius is praying, a Gentile. At what time? At the hour of prayer. Remember, all right, you're not getting it, are you? Look. And Peter and John went together into the temple at the hour of prayer, being the 9th hour. That's what I'm trying to tell you. You have 3 designated times that prayer happens in the courtyards of the temple, and the people all gathered together to pray. And that evening was when the incense was offered, and you just knew. Hey, when you went up to the temple to do that, you just knew this was happening. That's why these details are given in there. See, let me ask you: Peter and John go into the temple at any time they want to? It's a designated hour of prayer. Now, let me ask you. If prayer hasn't changed, how come you're not doing that? Where did you get the idea that you can pray anytime you want, anywhere you want? I asked you that at the beginning, right? When can you pray? You said anytime. I said, where do you have to be? You said anywhere. By the way, if a Jew, and we didn't go through these verses, but let me just tell it to you. He says, for those people that are not in Jerusalem, you still honor those 3 times of prayer, but you know what you had to do? You had to turn your face toward Jerusalem, toward the temple. And when Solomon dedicates the temple, he says, and if we have been carried away by our enemies into their lands, then if we turn our face toward thy holy city and toward thy house, and we offer our prayer to thee, then hear from heaven. So, you know what a Jew would do? He would, if he wasn't there where he could go into the courts and pray, he would face Jerusalem.
So the Jews and the Muslims have the same ritual.
The Muslims ripped that off because that was way, but this law came along way before.
Saying that in Algeria, you'd look out and you'd see them at certain hours of the day with their little prayer rug.
Yeah, they put the rug out and they have this whole ritual. And look, you know what? And people who don't know anything, they're so attracted to that. That ritual looks like something. They kneel down, they bow down, they turn their head this way. There's something they whisper. They do this thing. Yeah, they got this whole ritual. And people who are steeped in religion but not in the truth look at that and they're enamored by that. And they think, oh, what a cool deal. Not when it winds you up in the lake of fire.
Right. Well, I just wondered, that was a whole lot to say. Yeah.
Yeah, and so that's where that came from. Muhammad took that because he saw that with the Jews. You know, the only problem is Muhammad didn't understand he was living in the dispensation of grace.
Right.
So he's copying what Israel does. And churches aren't much better today. You know what they do? They dress a guy up like the high priest with all the regalia, with the breastplate and the rows of the stones and all of the stuff, and they stand him up on the platform and they talk about all of that like it's the most spiritual thing and we need to get back to our Jewish roots and all that kind of business. And God looks at that and says, that's childhood. You're adult sons and daughters. Quit acting like kids that don't know why I'm doing what I'm doing. Hey, when they determined God's will back then, you went to the head of your family. If he didn't know it, you went to the head of the tribe. If he didn't know it, you went to the council. And if they couldn't tell it to you, you went to the high priest and he had a little bag that had a black stone, a white stone, and he reached in, he pulled out the white stone. The answer was yes. He pulled out the black stone. The answer was no. And that's how they knew God's will. But if you said to the high priest, why is it no? He would say this, I don't have any idea. It's just God's will. That sounds like people today.
Okay, right.
Well, God's in the healing business. How come he didn't heal you from wearing glasses? Well, I don't know why. Just that's not his will. Quit being a dadgum child in Israel's... Okay, I'm sorry. Stop being children. Paul's going to say it. Quit being children tossed to and fro with every wind of doctrine. For goodness sakes, grow up! We wear that thing like a badge of honor. Okay. Okay. Yeah, but I took my pill, so I think I'm okay. Okay. Look, you know... Do you see what I'm saying? Prayer isn't anything like it was in Israel's program.
Well, I often wondered why the Muslims did that. So you just answered my question.
There you go. They saw the Jews doing that because that was part of the Jews' religion. That is what they did. See, at some point, someone realized we don't do that. But see, there's a reason behind all of that. Prayer is very different today. If it wasn't, you'd all either be facing the temple, or if it was about your church, you'd be facing the church.
Facing east as the Muslims.
You know, yeah, I mean, it's just, okay, so you get that. All right, now I said all of that because I started this passage in Daniel where Daniel said that he was in prayer before God, confessing his sin and the sin of his people Israel at the 9th hour of the day. So you see, okay. Now, take you back to the Daniel passage and we'll keep reading. Sorry, I must have backed up to show you something, did I? Yeah. And he informed me and talked, this is Gabriel now talking to Daniel. Remember, now we're back to Daniel. And he informed me and talked with me and said, O Daniel, I am now come forth to give thee skill and understanding. At the beginning of thy supplications the commandment came forth, and I am come to show thee, for thou art greatly beloved. Therefore understand the matter, and consider the vision. 70 weeks are determined upon thy people, and upon thy holy city, to finish the transgression, to make an end of sins, to make reconciliation for iniquity, and to bring in everlasting righteousness, and to seal up the vision and prophecy, and to anoint the most holy. Know therefore and understand that from the going forth of the commandment to restore and to build Jerusalem unto the Messiah the Prince shall be 7 weeks, and 62 weeks. The street shall be built again, and the wall even in troublous times. After 62 weeks shall Messiah be cut off, but not for himself. And the people of the prince that shall come shall destroy the city and the sanctuary, and the end thereof shall be with a flood, and unto the end of the war desolations are determined. And he shall confirm the covenant with many for 1 week, and in the midst of the week he shall cause the sacrifice and the oblation to cease, and the overspreading of abominations he shall make it desolate, even until the consummation, and that determined shall be poured upon the desolate. Long passage. There's just a couple of things I want to get to. Let me just point them out, and then I'll make the point as to why we're over here in the first place. Notice, and I highlighted it for you, there are 2 different princes mentioned in the passage. The first one is a capital P. Messiah the Prince. We all know who that is. Okay? He's talking about that it says, from the going forth of the commandment to restore and to build Jerusalem unto Messiah the Prince shall be 7 weeks and 62 weeks. He's breaking that down into parts. The street shall be built again on the wall even in troublous times. Later, though, he's going to talk about not a capital P prince, but a small case P prince. The prince that shall come. And I'll show it to you right here. And it says, and after 62 weeks shall, capital M, Messiah, be cut off, but not for himself. And the people of the small case P, prince that shall come, shall destroy the city and the sanctuary, and the end thereof shall be with a flood. None of the end wars of the war desolations are determined. Who is the small case P prince? The Antichrist. He's the Antichrist. Here's the problem. A lot of commentators read this and they think every time they see the word prince, it's talking about Jesus. And if you don't understand that, the rest of the passage is a mess you cannot sort through. So that's the first thing I want to do. But the second thing I want to show you is, and this is the reason we came over here, is because we saw back in Isaiah where he said, we have made a covenant with death, and with hell we are in agreement. Remember that? This is the covenant. They agree with the adversary, and they've made a covenant. And he shall confirm the covenant with many for 1 week. That's the covenant that he was talking about back there. This is where Israel is going. This is the effects of the works of darkness. They've been along that line. Remember I said when John the Baptist showed up, that what Isaiah was writing about them then is what was true. You know what? They were in agreement with the adversary. They're going to make a covenant with death. And that really is going to be the case. But God is not going to let that stand. Look, and I go back to Isaiah now, Isaiah 28. Therefore thus saith the Lord God, behold, I lay in Zion for a foundation stone, a tried stone, a precious cornerstone, a sure foundation. He that believeth shall not make haste. Judgment also will I lay to the line, and righteousness to the plummet. And the hail shall sweep away the refuge of lies, and the waters shall overflow the hiding place. And your covenant with death shall be disannulled, and your agreement with hell shall not stand when the overflowing scourge, isn't that what they called it? When the overflowing scourge comes, it's not going to affect us. And God says, and when the overflowing scourge shall pass through, then ye shall be trodden down by it. That was the whole point. You guys think you're going to do this and I'm just not looking? Or it doesn't matter? He says, oh, this is going to happen. You are going to experience this. Okay. So what I've done here, and we'll stop because we're out of time, because now we can turn, with that understanding of this has been, I'd have to say one more thing. This thing didn't jump from just nowhere to suddenly now they've made an agreement with Satan. That happens in a process, little by little. The works of darkness, what they do is, let's just take the pride of life for example. When we see what it is that it's attacking, in other words, it's not like, okay, I'm involved in the pride of life. A guy is out there in the world in the pride of life. Things take over in his life and he's now conducting himself with them. He doesn't suddenly look at this issue and go, oh no, I'm getting rid of that and I'm replacing it with the adversary substitute. That happens piecemeal. It happens first of all by getting him to start doubting. And he's not sure. And then he's confused. And then he begins to see something in this replacement that, you know what, maybe that is a good thing. You know, maybe I've just been looking at that wrong. It's a very slow and subtle thing. I talk about it like watching your kids grow up every day. You don't notice the changes. These things are happening in a process. But at their end, this is where where that thing that was in place that you thought would never be any different is completely torn away. And it's been replaced with something that Satan has engineered to keep men in those works of darkness. So we want to come back and we want to identify those things. Okay, so we'll take a break here and then we'll come back in a